Hello, hello. Oh, hi folks. How's it going? Sorry about that. Woo! I needed that. Greetings, folks. My name is Dustin Cormier. You're watching How to Rock Astrology. This is going to be the end of our series, or not the end of our series, but the end of the chapter that we've been reading. It's Astrology Karma and Transformation by Stephen Arroyo. We have been going through the fourth chapter of this book, Keys to Transformation, Part 2, which is Pluto. Considering Pluto as one of the sole important keys to unlocking how we can take our karma and constructively transmute it and transform it, likely through difficult confrontations in this present incarnation, with whatever Pluto is aspecting, whatever house Pluto is affecting by house, whatever sign and sign lord Pluto is affecting. Pluto is going to bring a confrontation of everything that it's been with this mob, gangster, uncontrollable, unconscious, energy, some kind of energy in the life that has to be confront things that we take for granted, especially whatever Pluto is in an aspect to, will be dissolved, obliterated completely in order to be seen in a new light. This is what Pluto does. Pluto typically very much is a figure for a constant continuum, a stream of neurogenetic habits that we have never, that it's a reservoir of a certain preference, a certain way of being, a certain grip and attachment to whatever Pluto is affecting. And it's Pluto's aspects to other things in transit, transits of planets to our natal Pluto. It's these things that affect and build and cause this confrontation that causes us to transform these old ways of being in order to put them towards a more conscious, constructive purpose in life. So this today is the end of chapter 4, and at some point we're eventually going to pour into chapter 5, which is all about Saturn and how Saturn relates to karma. It's going to be great. But for now, let's finish off with Pluto. This particular chapter, we are talking about the aspects of Pluto. So I hope you enjoy. This is, again, continuing from our reading of the houses. You might have just wanted to watch the video talking about your Pluto in its house. This is going to be the final word on that, talking about the aspects of Pluto and how it affects our reading of what you might have read in the Pluto in the Houses video. Of course, I get everything ready except for my water. In my experience, Stephen Arroyo begins. In my experience as a clinical astrological counselor, the aspects involving Pluto are among the most difficult factors in any chart to understand. For one never knows on what level the potential is manifesting. It can be very hidden and subliminal in the person's unconscious. Although the nature of Uranus is often referred to as unpredictable, it seems to me that the action of Pluto is even more unpredictable. In many cases, it seems to make little difference whether the aspect being considered is a harmonious or an inharmonious one, whether it's a trine, whether it's a square, whether it's an aspect from a malefic or a trine from a benefic. It's still hard to know how we're going to take that. In fact, as one begins to investigate the aspects of any of the Trans-Saturnian planets, one sees that the so-called stressful aspects are often found in the charts of the most creative and spiritually aware people. Our evaluation of the meaning of various aspects, therefore, really depends fundamentally upon our own philosophy of life and the particular individual purpose that we value most highly. If our primary purpose is to have a life of ease and absence of major problems, but also, therefore, absence of challenges towards growth and creativity, there might be some justification for approaching aspects in the traditional way of labeling them hard or soft, or good or bad, stressful versus easy. But if we have the capacity to see life's possibilities with more complexity and depth and a transcendental perspective on our own pain, then it becomes much more difficult to categorize various types of human experience according to simplistic a priori types. Pluto often, the vibe of Pluto, I have Pluto prominently placed in my chart. I'm a Leo rising, and I have the Sun and Mars conjunct Pluto in Scorpio in the 4th house. I know it's a lot, but Pluto is touching my 1st house lord, and I feel like I have a big Pluto vibe, and I often find that Pluto kind of relates to psychedelics. Some people have very dark, horrible experiences from psychedelics, but afterwards, the long view, when you look at it in retrospect, you could see that the hard psychedelic trips teach you something about yourself. For anyone who's into psychedelics, that's its own interesting thing. It's almost Kundalini energy can be the same way. When you start to build Kundalini energy in your body, you can have deep internal crippling neuromatic psychological obliteration experiences that can be very hard. But what you learn afterwards, if you can channel it constructively and look at it in a positive light, will always be very insightful to the things that you don't want, things that don't make you happy in life. So these Pluto experiences can bring tension and difficulty, but oftentimes it's the tension that draws out the essence of the elements of the self that one wants to observe and eventually become illuminated to. The fact most obvious to me, Stephen Arroyo says, is that if one assumes that there is indeed a creative intelligence from which all life manifestations emanate, then every life experience is guided by this higher intelligence and has a specific purpose. Now, how do we question this purpose? To do so is to reveal our own intellectual arrogance. For it is a bold step to think that we have the capacity to know better than the architect of this universe. There are more things in this world that are dreamed of in your philosophy, Horatio. It's the classic Shakespeare line. Outlined in chapter 6 of this book is a more holistic, and Arroyo says that it's a more constructive approach to aspects than is commonly found in astrological textbooks, and we will probably eventually get to that chapter 6 in this book. This chapter is just underlying the meaning and mythos and theme of Pluto and what it means. Some of the above questions are considered further in that chapter, as is more specific material about Pluto aspects. But there are some basic points about these aspects we can clarify here, since they are related to the characteristics of Pluto already discussed. Aspects of Pluto to another planet in the individual chart show how easily one can use the Pluto energy and how easily one may undergo a Plutonian regeneration regarding that thing. Trines are easier, squares are more difficult, but ultimately it depends on the health of the Lord that Pluto is aspecting. If the Pluto is square to the Sun, it might be a tense aspect, but if the Sun is trine Jupiter, its friend, or if it's with Mars in the same sign, or if it's got trines to benefics like Venus or the Moon, these are the kind of things that can give the Sun the real strength it needs to deal with the obliterating Pluto aspect. But there are some basic points about these aspects we can clarify here, right? And that's what this book's trying to do. Right. So, aspects of Pluto to another planet show how easily one can use that Pluto energy, and how they can, whether they can and will undergo a Plutonian regeneration regarding that planet. It's when Pluto's in a tense aspect to another planet. A similar type of development and transformation may, for example, be indicated by both the trine and the square between the same planets. But the person may forcefully resist the change when the aspect is square, whereas when the aspect is more harmonious, for example, the trine or sextile, or coming from a benefic, it seems that the person often has an inner knowledge of why this particular change is necessary, and hence they accommodate themselves to the necessary changes more readily. They have a sense that it's for a good meaning and purpose. In the squares, it's more invisible, and they meet a confrontation, but the confrontation brings out the lived experience of the necessity of the Plutonian purging. With the trine, you sense it already, but you still experience it, but the whole time, it's less of a powerful confrontation because you are in tune with why it's happening. Specifically, it often seems that those with Pluto in trine or sextile to their sun or moon, or at times to other personal planets, it's these people that have an innate understanding of natural processes of growth and transformation. They often take for granted the fact that life is always demanding that we leave behind the old and open ourselves to the new. This does not mean that such people never experience any pain related to Plutonian changes, but simply that they know and accept the fact that the pain they do experience is a necessary part of life. It helps to release the grip of trauma in this regard. The fact that a similar type of transformation may be indicated, whether the aspect of Pluto is traditionally hard or easy aspect, can be illustrated by this following example. Note that it's primarily the person's approach to dealing with the required changes that's indicated most specifically by the relative harmony or disharmony of the aspect itself, whether it's square or trine. Sorry for the music of my neighboring neighbors. During a consultation with a 30-year-old man a few years ago, Stephen Arroyo and the man were talking about his emotional reactions and general emotional state when he made the following statement: "I find that I am always having to reform my feeling states to consciously change my immediate reactions to many different situations." This particular person at that time had very little knowledge of astrology, and certainly no in-depth familiarity with Pluto aspects. And yet a glance at his chart revealed that he was born with Pluto in a close orb trine to the moon. What better symbol could we have of the exact experience that he had just described? But the key point here is that he was aware that he was continually making a conscious effort to effect the reforming and transforming of this part of his nature. It was not something he resisted or was especially troubled by. It was perceived to be simply a regular transformative experience in his everyday life, which he fully accepted as necessary, although he was unaware of the astrological symbolism of the process. Someone else with Pluto in conjunction, square, or opposition to the natal moon in a hard aspect to the moon might experience the same need to alter his or her spontaneous emotional reactions in order to cope with and adapt to everyday life. But a person with these particular aspects might see it as more of a problem and might tend to resist initiating the effort to make the required changes. Might be more of an annoying thing. Rather, with the man in the example who had Moon trine Pluto, it just seemed like a natural, obvious, annoying thing that I have to do, but I'm going to do it. With Pluto square Moon, or in a tough aspect to the Moon, we might see examples of a person who resists it, who is forced to have to deal with it through confrontation. Pluto, in any aspect to a personal planet, means that there is an increase of consciousness due, a rebirth of sorts, with respect to that part of oneself symbolized by the other planet. This increase of consciousness may be regarded as especially necessary for one's growth if the aspect is a conjunction, square, quincunx, or opposition. In my case, it's the Sun is directly conjunct. Sun and Mars are directly conjunct Pluto within 4 degrees. In other words, the dimension of experience symbolized by the planet in aspect to Pluto needs to be transformed into a higher or more conscious level of expression. Among the more dynamic aspects, I always like to say that, like Jyotish Vedic astrology has a different sense of planetary aspects for anyone who might be watching who's a Vedic person. We have to think about it in a different way. Hard aspects basically come from malefics. Pluto getting a trine from the Sun, or one of Mars's aspects of the 4th house from Mars, the 7th or the 8th from Mars, or one of Saturn's aspects, because Saturn's a malefic. This is what gives Pluto the hard, tough incapacity to express itself. Whereas if Pluto is being aspected by a benefic like Venus or the benefic Moon, or Mercury if it's benefic, or Jupiter, these are the things that give us a positive grip on Pluto. This is something that I'm adding as a cross-cultural reference, but you as Westerners, if you're more curious about that, watch the rest of my videos, because I'm always bridging the gap between Western astrology and Vedic astrology. Personally, I'm more of a Vedic astrologer than the Western, but I digress. Among the more dynamic aspects of Pluto, it's the conjunction, the square, and the quincunx usually indicate an inner tension and challenge, which we can either accept as something we need to face with full intensity and commitment, or which we can try to avoid or run away from. The other dynamic aspect involving Pluto, which is the opposition, usually indicates that compulsive, demanding, and willful tendencies interfere quite regularly with the development of certain relationships in our lives. The other planet involved, and the houses wherein the planets fall, usually give enough information that the specific type of relationship where this problem is focused can be understood. It's my experience that people with Pluto oppositions very rarely realize the fact that it is their own subtle demands that the other person be different from what he or she truly is. These are the things that create the relationship problems. It's their own subtle demands, demanding that the other person be different from what they truly are. This is what creates relationship problems when any important planet is opposite Pluto. In fact, since Pluto by nature is usually indicative of a certain complex of compulsive unconscious tendencies, it's not surprising that the majority of people with whom I have dealt cannot immediately identify with the compulsive behavior patterns indicated by Pluto in their charts. No one can ever read and hear, I have Pluto in this house, so, or if an astrologer says you have Pluto in this house, so you feel compulsive in this way, it's hard for people to think that they have that compulsion, because it's such a long sphere of transformation. It is only when people have taken definite steps towards an honest, even ruthless self-examination that they do become conscious enough of their own deeper feelings and motivations to be able to relate to the meaning of Pluto in their charts, in their own charts. And the tension of the difficult Pluto aspects can then generate the ability to express the Pluto energy in a particularly dynamic way. Right. Trines and sextiles can mean that one easily expresses the Pluto energy in a creative way. But this is not necessarily always true. These aspects do show that the channel is open for the expression of that energy. But if the energy is still unrefined, still unregenerated, these aspects can simply mean that one can rather easily express the negative, compulsive side of Pluto's power related to that house, and even in the elemental vibration. You know, if Pluto is in trine to another planet and they're both in fire signs, Pluto might just end up clogging the energy pathways related to fire. For example, I once had a consultation with a woman who has Pluto in her 9th house, exactly in trine to her moon. Pluto in the 9th house can signify rigidly compulsive opinions and beliefs that have been carried over from a past incarnation. And this is one of the usual meanings of Pluto in the 9th until a transformation of one's ultimate beliefs has taken place. This particular woman repeatedly defeated her groping attempts at growth by clinging to her rigid 9th house beliefs. The moon was obstructing, in a way, Pluto in the 9th was obstructing the growth which the moon sought. There was no logic to her ideas, nor were they based on any kind of personal revelation or intuition. Her pattern of believing and the resulting opinions she seemed to be simply a kind of past... The woman's pattern of believing, her familiar pattern, especially relating to the moon, and the resulting opinions seemed to be simply a kind of past conditioning from which she had difficulty freeing herself. No matter how dissatisfied with her present life she was, and no matter what alternative ways of dealing with life were presented to her, she was always able to call upon some inflexible belief, which she could use as an excuse for not taking any risk or personal responsibility to change her life. Hence, even though the aspect with Pluto in this case is a harmonious one, being in trine to the moon, it seems to indicate merely that she was able to express her self-defeating attitudes and opinions with comparative ease. It is only when she has gone through a transformative process in this area of her life, when she succeeds in leaving behind these inhibiting compulsions, that this trine can begin to manifest positively and creatively. Pluto aspects can also give us a clue about how a person uses his or her willpower and concentrated, single-pointed mental power. Although one must be careful in applying general principles to an individual person, I feel certain that the conjunctions, squares, and oppositions tend toward a willful sort of behavior. And I would say, again, for Vedic people, it's aspects from the Sun, Mars, Saturn, or the Moon and Mercury when they're malefic. These, any tense, tough, hard aspects. These same aspects, however, so even though These tend toward a willful sort of behavior in which the person tries to overpower the will of another person rather ruthlessly. These same aspects can also show the potential for developing an extremely powerful inner strength and courage if the individual succeeds in becoming aware of his or her tendency toward a misuse of power and brings it under conscious control. If the Pluto power is expressed creatively, the person can exhibit great self-discipline, unshakable dedication to spiritual development, and a strong sense of resourcefulness. This is what I feel that I experience through having Mars and the Sun conjunct Pluto in Scorpio. There's a lot of heat, a lot of destruction and destructive tendencies there, but I'm finding, because Mars especially is well placed in Scorpio for various reasons, I do find that I have a vindictive, singular pointed concentration focus that I can use constructively in things like these videos and what have you. Another insight into the meaning of Pluto and its aspects became apparent to me when I was listening to a lecture by Richard Eidman, a well-known astrologer and lecturer. He related Pluto to the concept of taboo and to the fears that people experience in relation to such socially forbidden realms. This concept of taboo is a very useful one, for it explains a great deal about not only Pluto, but also the significance of the 8th house and the deeper nature of the sign of Scorpio. For example, it has become clear to me that Scorpionic and Plutonian people are particularly susceptible to paranoia in one degree or another. One of the reasons for this deep inner terror is, as I mentioned earlier, the fact that such people don't readily trust other people or their own feelings and motivations. They see the reflection of others' distrustfulness, and a Scorpio might not even trust their own inner impulses. This damn human thing is so impure, I said to myself. But another reason for this paranoia and the behavioral and relationship problems resulting from such fear is that the person often feels guilty about breaking social, moral, or familial taboos. There's an extremely intense attraction-repulsion conflict which Plutonian people feel about taboo areas of life. And whether they actually experiment directly by acting out their interest in these taboo areas of life, or whether they merely think about such things but repress the desire to act them out. These people are often troubled by feelings of guilt and by the inner conviction that they will have to pay for such transgressions. It seems to me that the people who refuse to confront their true desires through some kind of direct action and experimentation are the ones most likely to suffer from the inner stagnation, the negativity and paranoia which can flourish in a severely repressed individual. When this repression, something as simple as going to the bathroom when you're young and your mother says, no, you have to hold it, and this pattern for this person can start to grip. Am I allowed to go to the bathroom? Obviously, your bladder's about to explode. This is obviously a necessary need inside of yourself which needs to be expressed, or else you're going to hurt yourself. But the memory of having heard from your mother that I can't express my erupting inner needs at my own discretion and freedom, this pattern builds and builds and builds over the time. So eventually you're 24 years old. You've never questioned perhaps whether, if this is in like the 4th house or an erotic house, or if it's an aspect of Venus, perhaps you've never questioned whether you might be homosexual or some sexual deviancy that you've never experimented with, or that you're interested in psychedelic drugs, or that you're interested in something that's taboo from the family's perspective, even though it might actually be moral and ethical. These are all things that might build up from the first instance of you not being able to go to the bathroom when mom said, wait till you wait, or whatever, right? At least if the person acts out his or her true desires, the taboos and the emotional attachments to those activities are brought out into the light so that the person can begin to take full responsibility for his or her deeper feelings, because they know that the grass isn't greener on the other side of the field. They've experimented with the thought of what this taboo is. You might even engage in the taboo once, something as simple as cheating on your lover, cheating on your husband or your wife. You know, I don't recommend that you do that. I recommend that you communicate and talk about this with your wife or your husband and deal with it. And this is the nature of the taboo. It can be a very difficult thing for anybody to have to deal with. That's why we have astrologers and astral relationship counselors. You know, especially an astral relationship counselor who you can talk to, and they can clearly see you have this Plutonian impulse, and then you can have a conversation with your lover, maybe even work out some kind of thing where you bring in somebody, express that, you know, like cuck mentality, BDSM. These are all things that are very Plutonian and can be expressed, and the taboo can be released so that you realize that it's not even... The taboo wasn't even that tasty. I just needed to feel like I had the freedom to do it if I wanted to. Oftentimes, Pluto does work that way. The trines are more like that. With a square, you might engage in the taboo once and think like, oh, it was gross, but I kind of did like it. You know, there are times where some taboos are not worth exploring, including a person who has, you know, Pluto in square to Moon or something important like that, or the 12th house Lord. You might dabble in heroin just to see that, just to try it because it's taboo and everyone always said not to do it. But now you've got an even worse demon on your hands being addicted to heroin. So you got to be very particular and careful and discerning with the way that you express this fascination with the taboo that Pluto might bring up. Friends having fun in the other room. How can we take this concept of taboo and apply it to the understanding of specific aspects with Pluto? In all aspects involving Pluto, especially the conjunction, square, and opposition, the individual feels the pressure to confront a certain taboo. This forbidden area may be sexual, religious, ethical, familial, social, or a combination of some or all of these areas of life. The first impulse in most people is to try to control this tendency by repression. However, many people eventually find that this pent-up transformative power impels them to confront the taboos and to break through their restrictions. Seems to me that some sort of breakthrough is usually necessary in order to achieve, in conscious life, the transformation shown as potential in the aspect configuration. The taboos must be confronted, since all the psychic garbage, fears, attachments, and negativity have to be brought to the surface in order to be outgrown or transmuted. It's the fears, the subliminal thoughts, the things that you take for granted that you constantly run away from, that are extremified with Pluto, and you might come to find that they were never really that scary, never really that tough, never really that hard. It's like the person who keeps giving themselves excuses of all the painful fears and all the death that they could cause if they drove a car. So a lot of people never get to driving a car because they have so much internal fears about it. But once they start driving, once they put their hands on the wheel and put their foot on the gas and practice for about a month or two consistently, they'll come to find that all the fears they had are completely unfounded because they're actually a good driver, right? How can one escape from a prison If one has no knowledge of the structure of the prison, of your fears, of your reactions, how the various locks work, when the guards are off duty, etc. Everything must be faced with great immediacy, with Pluto especially. Some people who have the stressful aspects of Pluto to the personal planets sense the overwhelming power of that subterranean force and become terrified of being overpowered by it and of losing control, a control which they don't really have to the extent that they think anyhow. They often respond to this fear by trying even harder to ruthlessly manipulate others, to repress their emotions with an iron will, and to deny the existence of this force. This kind of response, of course, merely increases the tension already being felt and ultimately aggravates the problem. This kind of repression, by the way, often manifests eventually as the person acting like one possessed, i.e., acting in a compulsive manner and driven by forces which are totally unconscious. The person is, in fact, possessed. He is possessed by an intense desire which he refuses to acknowledge. This is what demons were called back in the day. It's the activity of Pluto and subterranean genetic impulses which don't seem to come from the conscious mind. As long as he continues to function, assuming that where there's a will, there's a way, this might makes right attitude will cause them no end of trouble. In fact, the reason that Pluto, Scorpio, and the 8th house are so connected with transformation is that they have to do with the power of desires, the desires which forge our attachments, the desires that still motivate us compulsively. Getting to the heart of these feelings, penetrating to the source of these desires and their implications, can illuminate not only our everyday experience, but also the karmic patterns of this lifetime. Very deep stuff. So wonderful. I love the writing of Stephen Arroyo. That last little bit, this last chapter on Pluto has just been so heavy and illuminating regarding taboos, regarding dealing with Pluto. So I've got lots more to talk about, folks. For now, we're going to call this the end of this part of our Stephen Arroyo series. I think we're going to do the next part of this series in about 3 weeks, something like that, for all those who are watching live and who are interested. So this has been a lot about Pluto, relating to how Pluto can act as a key and an aspect of our capacity to transform our genetic data towards the purposes of the evolutionary meaning and purpose of this entire life. Very important, very relevant, and I hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know in the comments, like, subscribe, comment, let me know what you think, and keep your eyes peeled because we got more stuff coming out in the world of how to rock astrology. And the next time we come and talk about this book, we're going to be talking about Saturn, its nature and cycles. Dun, dun, dun. So I hope you guys enjoy that. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you think. I'm always in touch. And I'll see you guys on the